thank you. Yes, because I'm speaking in a little while in the chamber, and it's always good to listen to the debate before you go in, but we all know that. First of all, thank you so much for the three presentations this morning. And the first comment I'd make is that, you know, I agree with Dara that the European Year of Youth has sort of crept up on us, and I think that's unfortunate because, as we all know, if we're well prepared, we can make the most of it. But as they say, we are where we are. And the one comment I would make, perhaps to begin with, is given that we're now, you know, towards the end of February, maybe this committee and perhaps Lurgas, the National Youth Council of Ireland, might look at some way that this committee could play a role, perhaps to assist, to help you, to get the word out there. I mean, obviously today is really important, but just if there was anything else, and I don't want to speak for the committee, but it's just a thought that struck me. Now, just one or two questions. First of all, to thank our colleague from Eurofound. And I listened to your presentation, and you spoke about the youth guarantee and how numbers who were NEETs between 2013 and 2019 had decreased, but obviously with the impact of COVID, that has been reversed. And obviously that has been a success. I just wanted to ask if you have any information on the Globalization Fund, because the last iteration of the Globalization Fund did include NEETs. And if, for example, a country was applying for maybe, let's say, 250 workers who had lost their jobs under the Globalization Fund, they could include the same number of NEETs. And that was a significant change. And I just wonder if that's played any role. If you know, perhaps you don't have any information on it, but certainly in the future it could play a role given what you've told us today. The National Youth Council of Ireland, Mark, you talked about your hopes and expectations for the year, and you talked about meaningful engagement. And obviously that's really important, but what I would ask is, what do you see as the practical outcomes? Have you any targets? Have you sort of, what are you working towards? And I would also direct this question at Lurgas as well. If right now I were to ask, what do you hope to see at the end of this year or this time next year as an outcome or outcomes from this year, what might that be? And I recognise the fact that we're talking here about no ring-fence funding, and I think I heard a figure of 143,000 for Lurgas, which is really tiny, tiny money. But nonetheless, and I'm not putting you under pressure on this, but I'm just asking for your perspective on it. Mark, you also mentioned youth proofing, or I think you called it, you said youth check, but I presume it's the same as youth proofing. Proofing. I'm not sure, but to me that sounds like a really good idea. And if that can be, you know, stitched through policy, that actually in itself would be a really good outcome. But just if you have any further thoughts on that. And finally, Lorraine and our colleagues in Lurgas, just to ask, what do you see as the contribution of the European Solidarity Corps? You know, over the last, again, I was in the Parliament when we drafted the legislation on this, or amended the legislation, should I say, and you know, we had high hopes for it, and I'm just wondering how it's working out, because you're the people who know how this plays out on the ground. I'm almost finished. Two things. You mentioned the issue of climate change, and that this year might be an opportunity for young people to get involved. Do any of you see this year as an opportunity for young people, not just, obviously raising awareness is hugely important, but also any practical programs, anything that people sort of can get their teeth into and get their hands dirty almost, as it were, so that they feel that they're not just being consulted, which is hugely important, they're not just being informed, which is equally important, but they're also participants. They're actors, if you like, in the best sense of the word. And finally, I am so pleased to hear that this year will be an opportunity for young people who don't see themselves as perhaps participating in programmes like Erasmus to get involved. Because I know from my experience, both as a teacher and as a member of the European Parliament, that Erasmus doesn't quite always perhaps reach, even though real efforts have been made, and I understand and recognise that, but just reach those perhaps feel that it's not for them. So I'm delighted to hear that that's part of your programme. I know that's a bit of a ramble, but there's a lot of, I think, really good stuff here, and stuff that perhaps we in the committee can maybe assist or help with. But that's for another day. But thank you for your presentations, and on a February morning, it's nice to have a bit of brightness. Thank you.
Okay, and yeah, we'll all agree to that. Thanks for that, Deputy. So I'll start this time with Oireachtas, if that's okay. Lorraine and Emma, if you want to kick-start, there's a couple of questions going your way.
Thanks very much. I have a couple noted, but if I miss anything, you might redirect me as well, and I'll try and cover everything off. I suppose the first thing I wanted to talk about is what you were saying there around practical actions, especially around climate change and potentially engaging young people directly in the activity, which I think is really important. You know, talking about it, thinking about it's very important, but feeling it and being involved and being a participant is absolutely essential. And I know that this week DCEDI are inviting applications from youth organisations for funding under Youth Climate Justice Fund. That might be something that's of interest to people listening in, and I know it's something that they're communicating more broadly as well this week. And I think that will have a new emphasis in 2022 for young people with fewer opportunities as well, you know, to try and engage and have that broader reach into the full and the wider community. I think the other question I can kind of tie in a little bit in terms of what you were asking about the European Solidarity Corps, which I suppose has resonates, I suppose, in some ways as a surprise, because if you were in Parliament at the time, you'll also know it was another kind of sort of an initiative of the President of the European Commission at the time, and it was a programme that was built on the bones of an existing action within Erasmus Plus that had been up and running for volunteering for young people for the 20 years at that stage. So what I can tell you about the journey, I suppose, of the Solidarity Corps is I think that you're absolutely correct. At the very outset, there was a lot of investment and there was huge ambition for the European Solidarity Corps. Some areas of the programme, as it was originally designed, were much more engaging, I suppose, for organisations and for young people than potentially others. So we have a programme now that doesn't include the original, I suppose, the work placement idea. That's being delivered separately, I think, through the ALMA initiative that was also referenced by our colleagues in Eurofound. So this is a much more youth, community, civic organisations focused programme, and it really does support young people to really live and work and experience communities and cultures all across Europe as they volunteer in organisations and in communities around issues like climate change or around social justice issues or around mental health issues, and they're involved in lots of different organisations in Ireland and across the EU. What is another wonderful initiative of that programme, and thank you to the people who supported it, is the solidarity projects, and they're projects that can happen at a local level, designed, developed and implemented by the young people who are living in that community. So those kinds of projects at the moment, we're seeing quite a lot of them focused on areas around mental health, around equality, around climate justice, and also around social justice in the areas of direct provision and various other issues like that. So many young people are involved in those projects. And the last thing I'll say is just on that, we would also see in in the European Solidarity Corps quite high participation rates for young people with fewer opportunities, which is how we try to measure our reach into more inclusive and more diverse areas of cooperation and partnership. I hope that covers the questions that you asked, and if not, I'm happy to come back with a follow-up.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine. We'll go to you now, Mark, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Deputy Harkin, for the questions. And I suppose, you know, within NYCI, we'd be happy to make members of the committee aware, or even perhaps through the chair, of anything that we're hosting in relation to the European Year Youth, or anything going forward that may be of relevance in a European context. When it comes to, you mentioned meaningful engagement and practical outcomes for this year. And I think one of them is really that idea of youth proofing, or a youth check, or a youth test. I mean, it's called many things. I think the youth test was sort of referred to by the European Youth Forum because they had a specific policy idea and specific way of carrying that out at a European level, but obviously it applies down to the national level also. So that is something that I think we'd like to see. Additionally, kind of you know, something that has already been achieved this year at a European level, or almost achieved by the European Youth Forum, is a ban on unpaid internships. They've had some recent successes, both in terms of litigation that they've taken at the European level, but also in terms of securing guarantees from national governments and things like that, to ban unpaid internships, which is obviously, you know, substantial benefit for youth already this year. And then I think, you know, as well, the other item, in addition to that youth check or youth test, or however you want to refer to it, that we'd like to see, is also just kind of engaging young people with Europe, but also with national politicians with an interest in Europe, or indeed MEPs, you know, in really a meaningful way, and allowing kind of young people's voices to be heard at all of those levels will be something we'd really like to see. In terms of climate change, you also mentioned, I think there needs to be a sort of policy focus on lobbying this area from the youth sector as a whole. The European Youth Forum, which is our representative body in Europe, just last year we adopted our first policy programme, and within that about a quarter of it was related to climate issues. So that kind of tells how much of a focus there is within the sector on this. But I think that kind of needs to come back to young people and enable them to engage in conversations around climate change and around other aspects of that whole area. In terms of Erasmus Plus, I just want to address that briefly as well. I was at an event with the European Movement Ireland last week where I was facilitating, and I was around a table of 8 or 9 students from UCC. And all of those students were saying, you know, or the vast majority, I think one had been on Erasmus. All the others were saying, well, it felt inaccessible, or we were coming from backgrounds where we felt we couldn't afford it, or, you know, our parents couldn't give us a bit of a nest egg to go, or, you know, things like that. Some of it is breaking down the barriers of kind of fear and making sure people are informed, but also some of it is making sure that it actually does reach and the funding is appropriate for people who need it. And that obviously has to happen at a European level, but also, you know, we need those young people's voices feeding in from national level to say, well, I couldn't go and here was the reason. It won't benefit them by the time policy change happens, but it might benefit, you know, the few years behind them, or indeed their children. And I'm happy to follow up further on anything I've addressed there if I haven't fully addressed the questions Deputy Harkin posed.
Thanks very much, Mark. And back over to Eurofound again.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Deputy Harkin, for the questions. First, in terms of visibility, again, our humble experience shows that the very interest of this committee in the Year of Youth is already increasing very much the visibility. I mean, this is what we have seen, and we shall be happy to work further with individual members, deputy senators on different strengths and issues. We continue our research. We can help with knowledge, data. We even have very good conference facilities here in Dublin. But these issues should be visible and seen, and our involvement of the committee and the members is very welcome. Your question on the Globalization Fund, just a sentence. This is the fund which is supposed to help the transition of closing down practically companies as a result of the globalization. I have to go back in my years when I was serving the European Parliament together with Deputy Harkin, working on these issues. Unfortunately, there is no ring fencing for young people, and especially for needs, when speaking about the use of Globalization Fund in the European regulations. But at national level, this might be a policy, and I would add not only the Globalization Fund, but also the whole green transition, the social fund, the green social fund, which is currently discussed in the European institutions, the national recovery and resilience plans that are also submitted. I mean, a national policy could rely on EU funding to address the issues of young people, and very clearly, and this is what our research shows, they are one of the candidates to have a dedicated special policies and eventually ring-fence budget for that. Thank you.
Okay.